Hello guys and welcome to MK Recaps. Show the channel some love by liking and subscribing to our channel. The movie opens with Robbie taking a shower in the boys' locker room at a high school. Suddenly, a group of bullies enter and grab him while he's still showering. In the gym, Calvin is receiving praise from the entire school during the last assembly. However, the moment is disrupted by the bully who brings a naked Robbie into the gymnasium in front of everyone. While everyone else laughs, it's clear that Robbie's reputation has been irreparably damaged by this incident. As Robbie runs away, Calvin gives him his jacket to cover up. After 20 years, the person who was once considered the most likely to succeed is not doing very well. Calvin's life has come to a standstill as he works as a low-level accountant and hates his job. During lunch with his high school sweetheart and now wife, Maggie, Calvin has to endure his coworkers celebrating his former assistant's promotion at another table. Maggie tries to shift the conversation by showing pictures of the dress she plans to wear to their 20-year reunion, but Calvin admits that he doesn't want to go. This leads to an argument between the two, as Maggie takes offense to the idea that Calvin's life is awful. Feeling down, Calvin returns to work and checks Facebook, where he sees the event for the reunion. Calvin receives a friend request from Bob Stone, which confuses him, but he confirms it anyway. As he does so, his phone rings, and he panics, but it's just Maggie on the other end. He apologizes to her, and she suggests they go to counseling. Calvin initially refuses, but Maggie insists on it. While she tries to convince him, Calvin starts receiving texts from Bob Stone, who turns out to be Robbie from high school. Calvin is shocked when he learns this and agrees to meet up with Robbie later that night. Maggie asks who he has plans with, and Calvin tells her it's Bob Stone, but she thinks it's a fake name. Calvin explains that it's actually Robbie, but it takes Maggie a moment to realize who he's talking about. She eventually agrees to let him go out and reschedule their counseling session. Calvin goes to the bar and is approached by a stranger who is in great shape and whom he doesn't recognize. The stranger then reveals that he is Bob Stone, also known as Robbie from high school, which shocks Calvin. The two catch up, but Calvin is thrown off by Bob's unusual behavior. They discuss work, and Bob reveals that he was a federal contractor before getting fired. After convincing Calvin to take some shots, Bob leaves to get them, but when another man tries to take Calvin's seat, he initially stands up for himself before realizing it's a bad idea. When Bob returns, he beats up the man and then leaves the bar with Calvin. Bob and Calvin visit their former high school. Bob remembered the incident that took place at the gym 20 years ago, and this triggered negative emotions for both. Bob convinces Calvin to attempt his famous backflip, which results in disaster. Later, Bob asks for Calvin's help with a parole issue, which Calvin agrees to without fully understanding what it entails. Calvin discovers Bob's involvement in offshore accounts worth millions of dollars, and when his computer malfunctions, Bob destroys it. Bob stays the night, and the next morning, the CIA arrives looking for him, but he has disappeared. Calvin is shocked when he learns that Bob is wanted for murder, treason, and is in possession of state secrets that he intends to sell to enemies of the U.S. Agent Harris interrogates Calvin and demands that he reveal everything he knows about Agent Stone. Calvin denies knowing Bob, but Agent Harris points out that Bob had listed him as an emergency contact on all of his forms, making Calvin a suspect. Despite Calvin's attempts to explain himself, Agent Harris believes that he is hiding something. Later, at Calvin's workplace, Agent Harris and her team accompany him. When a call from his wife Maggie comes in, Agent Harris tells him not to reveal anything to her, but Maggie mentions their therapy appointment and her desire for a baby. Meanwhile, Bob calls Calvin, claiming to be in trouble and hiding in the stairwell. Agent Harris and her team pursue Bob, and Calvin is told to hide in his office. Bob soon appears, and despite Calvin's attempts to get answers, Bob remains evasive. Bob removes Calvin's tie and calls an Uber, asking him to join him. When Calvin refuses, Bob tells him that it doesn't matter because he is already involved. Bob stands on the desk and puts Calvin's tie on the sprinkler, and Calvin tells him again that he is out.
I'm out!
Bob sets the tie on fire and tells Calvin that the only way to get out is by getting in first. Calvin runs and screams that Bob is there. Bob tackles Calvin to the ground as agents enter the room. Bob pretends that Calvin is a hostage, but he fires his gun. Calvin tries to run, but is picked up in a mail cart. Bob takes on all the agents with little difficulty, but when one of them wraps a cord around his neck, he begins to struggle. Inadvertently, Calvin shoots the gun, hitting the agent who was strangling Bob and releasing him. The agent tries to arrest Calvin. Bob's plan involves activating the sprinklers, using a flash grenade to create a diversion, and then escaping through a window onto a gorilla before jumping into an Uber. During their escape, Bob explains to Calvin that he needs his help to locate the site of an impending sale of stolen encryption keys for the entire U.S. spyware system. However, Calvin is uninterested in helping and just wants to go home. Bob insists they clear their names since they are wanted for crimes they didn't commit. Calvin expresses his frustration and informs Bob that he was accused of stealing the codes, but Bob denies it and suggests that Harris is trying to frame him for his partner's death. He recounts the story of how he and his partner Phil were on a mission to track down Black Badger to a penthouse apartment when they were attacked. Phil was killed in an elevator explosion, despite his efforts. Later, while they were being attacked by a motorcyclist, Calvin took advantage of the situation and escaped on the bike, leaving Bob to fight alone. Calvin then met Maggie at their therapist's office only to meet the disguised Bob. He tried to act calm, but she sensed that something was wrong. At the therapist's office, Harris approached Calvin and told him that she knew he was innocent. She revealed that Bob was the Black Badger and had betrayed his partner. She informed Calvin that he was the only one Bob trusted to help him sell the codes, and that was why they needed him in the field. Harris then gave Calvin a device with a button that would alert them if Bob was nearby. Calvin couldn't believe that all of this was happening because he had given Bob a jacket in high school. During the therapy session, Calvin is shocked to see Bob posing as the therapist. He attempts to leave, but Maggie convinces him to stay. Maggie accuses him of not wanting to save their marriage. She leaves, and Bob assures Calvin that Maggie will forgive him once they save the world. Calvin threatens Bob with the device, but eventually, Bob convinces him to help by promising that he's fighting for the right cause. Calvin decides to seek help from Trevor, Bob's high school bully, who is the only person he knows that can provide him with the transaction number. In the office, Bob appears to be struggling to keep his composure. Trevor tries to make small talk with Bob, but Bob can't even speak before giving him the numbers. He tells Bob that he found God and apologizes to him, but then his true colors emerge as he starts berating Bob.
Weird dick!
Although Calvin thinks Bob can take him, Bob shuts down and leaves. Calvin insults Trevor before obtaining the transaction number. While leaving, Harris calls and threatens Calvin, informing him that they are going to charge Maggie with conspiracy. Harris orders Calvin to get Bob outside and prepare for their arrival. Bob apologizes to Calvin for what had occurred and admits that Calvin was the only person who had ever treated him nicely. He also reveals that he does not have many friends and promises never to betray Calvin since he values their friendship. However, the situation takes an unexpected turn when Calvin confesses that he had disclosed their location to Harris. As a result, the CIA appears and apprehends Bob and Calvin. Harris interrogates Bob, while Calvin listens to his screams from being tortured. After witnessing Bob's agony, Calvin decides to take action and knocks out an agent, confiscates their gun, and demands a key card. He then rescues Bob, who seems pleased to see him, and handcuffs Harris. Despite her objections, Bob insists that he is doing the right thing. However, they encounter a problem when the keycard Calvin took does not work, and an agent threatens them with a gun. Bob comes to their rescue by ramming the agent into a door. After escaping and destroying a car, Bob gives them a phone and instructs them to enter codes into a map to locate their destination, which turns out to be Boston, meaning they will need to take a plane to get there. Eventually, Bob agrees to work with Calvin and they attempt a daring escape, during which Calvin gets carried away with excitement and forgets the consequences of his actions. The two heads to the airport and Bob reveals their next task is to steal a plane, which Calvin distracts the security guard while Bob pulls the plane from the hangar. During the flight to Boston, Bob pranked Calvin that the plane is running out of gas and will crash. So he said that they should make their last regrets in life before crashing. So, in fear, Calvin said he regretted not getting his wife pregnant. Instantly, Bob laughed and turned the plane on again, making Calvin look like a fool. upon arriving at their destination, but spots a parking garage where the action seems to be taking place. Bob heads to the parking lot, where he is quickly caught, while Calvin chases after Harris. But Phil appears and claims to be the Black Badger. Meanwhile, Harris interrupts the conversation and starts firing, causing everyone to shoot. Against his better judgment, Calvin runs out and grabs the drives that are lying on the ground. The buyer pursues him, and he narrowly avoids getting hit by a car. Bob saves him again, and Calvin continues to run. Eventually, Bob catches up with him on a bridge, and Phil appears out of nowhere. Calvin shoots Bob, but then realizes he is out of ammunition. He throws the gun at Phil, but Phil catches it and reloads. Phil explains that Bob is too weak to have been responsible for what happened the night Calvin faked his death, and tells Calvin to get on his knees. However, Calvin attempts his signature golden jet flip, which distracts them. Bob takes the opportunity to come up behind Phil and tear out his trachea before pushing him into the river. As they leave, Bob tells Calvin he would be perfect for the CIA, and urges him to hurry and give Harris the codes so they can make it to the reunion in style. Hare thanks Calvin for his service to his country. She offers him a ride in a helicopter to the reunion and potential career change, telling him to give her a call before he leaves. Maggie approaches Calvin and she is surprised to see the therapist there. Bob introduces himself and explains everything about the mission. Calvin tells Maggie that he is happy with his life because of her, and they share a kiss. At the reunion, Bob is announced as the homecoming king, and he is confused as he walks to the stage. Trevor started to mock and laugh at Bob, reminding everyone that he is still the naked kid in high school 20 years ago. This time Bob didn't just let it die off, he gave him a heavy and disastrous blow on the face, resetting his brain from high school, saying, "I don't tolerate bullies." He went up the stage thanking his good friend Calvin before stripping off his pants, standing like Adam in the Garden of Eden. Everyone cheered him as he displayed his well-built masculine body, dancing around as the DJ hit a cool music, making everyone cheer and begin dancing, jubilating in the reunion party. Days later, it is seen that Margaret, Calvin's wife, has given birth, and Bob pays his friend a visit, giving him a present, which is the jacket of 20 years ago in high school. Both friends later drove off to work as Calvin is now working in the CIA. Thanks for watching, guys. Please let me know what you think of this brief movie recap. Thank God we are at 26 subscribers, guys, and I really appreciate your love and support. Thank you.